Hey, it's Luke from LT Gaming, and today we can finally share our Star Wars Zero Company preview. After playing the game for around 50 hours, the preview build allowed us to play through 18 cycles of the campaign, and to say I took my time and soaked up absolutely everything would be an understatement. I experimented with different squads, explored the den, messed around with customization, played mission after mission, and generally tried to see how much the game actually has underneath that Star Wars exterior. And I think the big question is pretty simple here. Is this basically Star Wars XCOM, and more importantly, is it actually any good? Well, I'm happy to tell you the XCOM influence is absolutely there, but after 50 hours, Zero Company has a surprising amount of its own personality as well. So before we join Zero Company and probably miss another 90% blaster shot from point blank range, use the force on that like button. It helps the channel massively, and both me and Tom really appreciate it. So if you're new to all this, what actually is Star Wars Zero Company? It's a single player turn-based tactical strategy game from Bit Reactor, developed in collaboration with Lucasfilm Games and published by EA, releasing on August 27th for PC, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S. You're going to play as Hawks in this one, a former Republic officer leading an unconventional company of operatives during the twilight of the Clone Wars. Mixing Star Wars characters that you know, yes, Anakin is in it, but I'm not going to spoil any of that, with recruits you can create and develop yourself. But the important thing is that Zero Company isn't simply a string of tactical battles. Your campaign is divided into cycles, and between missions you return to your headquarters, the Den. This is where you upgrade everything, develop relationships, and decide where to go next. You then proceed to the holotable, where you have non-combat operations, which are like mini story missions, alongside full tactical missions where completing activities builds influence across 12 different zones and unlocks rewards. Missions also advance time, and because opportunities can disappear, there's always the little strategic layer sitting behind the actual battles. And that stuff's really important because it helps stop Zero Company feeling like a collection of disconnected encounters. Instead, you're bouncing between the Den, story moments, investigations, operations, and big turn-based battles, all while gradually building this group of misfits into your version of Zero Company. And that's actually probably the best way I can describe the game after 50 hours. It's not just about winning battles, it's about building the company that fights them. And that makes it very immersive and brings you into the world of Star Wars, even if it is new canon. And that brings us nicely onto story, which takes place during the final stages of the Clone Wars, and revolves around the Infinite Coil, a separatist-aligned paramilitary cult. The Coil are infected by the mysterious Shadow Plague, which supposedly grants them unnatural resilience and abilities. Okay, bear with me. And although it sounds a little bit odd, weirdly the whole cult-like presentation gave me slightly Star Trek vibes, and particularly reminded me of the opening of Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. You know, those earworms, those things were pretty terrifying at the time when I was a kid. But on the plus side, it's certainly a different kind of enemy to simply chasing another separatist general around the galaxy. It also reminded me a little bit of the old Han Solo adventures, particularly Han Solo at Star's End. Star Wars is so enormous that sometimes the best way to tell an original story is to find a corner of the universe where you have room to create something new. And to be honest, Zero Company feels like it's doing exactly that. We all know where the Clone Wars eventually leads, but the Infinite Coil gives Bit Reactor its own little war beneath the war, with new characters, threats, and mythology that don't need to interfere too heavily with everything we already know. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil where any of this goes, and we've only seen part of the story, but I was genuinely intrigued to discover more. Many of you know I've had a mixed relationship with some of the newer Star Wars canon, but this feels closer to the side of it that I enjoy. And somehow playing Zero Company has even got me reading Thrawn Ascendancy, so it definitely succeeded in pulling me deeper back into the wider Star Wars universe outside of my usual expanded universe material. But let's get to the heart of Zero Company, because the turn-based combat is where this game absolutely has to work. And after 50 hours, this is comfortably one of the strongest parts of the experience, I'm very happy to tell you. The obvious comparison, of course, is XCOM. You're controlling a small squad around tactical battlefields using positioning, cover, abilities, and Overwatch. But Zero Company feels like a much more modern and visually spectacular interpretation of that formula. Each operator has 3 action points which you can buff, and you can spend those on movement, attacks, and abilities. Cover can be destroyed, and damaging enemies builds a shared resource called Advantage that can power some of your strongest moves. The real fun though comes from how the characters work together. Operators can assist each other through things like call for backup, while completing missions together develops bonds, which feed back into progression through focus points, cross-training, and additional bonuses. I naturally started creating little tactical partnerships because of this. At one point I had a very healing heavy team that could take punishment and keep going, while another squad leaned heavily into droids, buffs and supporting each other. There are also specializations like assault, heavy, medic, scoundrel, scout, sharpshooter and soldier, so whenever I started getting bored with one playstyle, I could completely change the squad and approach the next battle differently. And I have to say, some of those battles genuinely gave me brilliant tactical moments. There was a few times when I was playing, guys, where I literally went, how am I possibly getting through all of these enemies? Somebody was injured, I was surrounded, my best abilities weren't available and everything looked like it was falling apart. But then you're able to spot a combination, make a few good moves and somehow find a way through. The blasters really pack a punch, some of the special attacks are genuinely fun to use, and those moments where a bad situation suddenly turns around were easily some of my favourites. Look, don't get me wrong, it definitely still got stressful here and there, but somehow I always seem to find a way to win. I have to say that turn-based tactical games are incredibly underrated in today's market, and while Zero Company doesn't reinvent the genre, it takes a classic formula, adds some clever teamwork systems and wraps it all up in a Star Wars flavour. Just a quick interlude to say subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100k and we really need you to get there. We are a proper PC gaming channel. You're going to find all the best games here, including space, war games, RTS and everything you can think of. We even do some amazing mod spotlights. So if you have amazing taste in games, hit the subscribe button. Both me and Tom really appreciate you. One of the biggest surprises to me was that Zero Company isn't permanently locked to the tactical camera. There are sections where you're walking around environments in third person, talking to people and investigating areas, and I actually really enjoyed them. They're much more limited than the tactical battles, but they help embed you in the story and can even provide additional intel for subsequent encounters. Look, it's not the main attraction in this game, but it adds some welcome variety and makes the wider adventure feel more immersive. Then there's the Den, Zero Company's headquarters, and this became one of my favourite parts of the game. Characters appear around the base, conversations pop up, and people actually seem like members of a crew rather than portraits sitting inside a menu. As you expand things in the base, you gain additional options and bonuses, but more importantly, I simply enjoyed hanging around there after missions, checking on the crew and deciding what I wanted to do next. It genuinely starts to feel like your base. And then we get to what might be the star of the entire game, customization. This was actually one of the things that caught my attention at the press event, where a cinematic showed Hawks essentially morphing between completely different versions of the character. And Zero Company doesn't just hand you one fixed protagonist and a squad, it gives you a surprising amount of control over what your version of the story looks like. You can significantly change Hawks and your custom operators from species and appearance through to outfits, weapons, abilities and combat roles. And you can really lean into whatever Star Wars fantasy you want. If you want to build a squad heavily around clones, then you can. If you want to start filling Zero Company with droids, you can do that as well. And I spent far more time than I expected simply tweaking the team and trying different combinations. And the important thing here is it makes everything feel more personal. That's something XCOM always understood brilliantly. A random soldier becomes far more important once you've customized them, developed them and somehow dragged them through 10 impossible missions. Zero Company takes that idea and drops it into Star Wars, and I think it's going to add a huge amount of replayability for people. The combat might be the core of the game, but customization is the feature that really made it feel like my Zero Company. Visually, Zero Company feels like a massive step forward from the older XCOM games, and some battles are genuinely spectacular. Blaster bolts fly across the battlefield, explosions rip through scenery, barrels go up, and the special abilities give fights that larger Star Wars spectacle. I particularly enjoyed the more open planetary missions where the environments and distant scenery really have room to breathe. Some of the darker sewer and interior missions didn't grab me quite as much. The soundtrack is everything you want from a Star Wars game, and the blasters, lightsabers, droids and environmental audio all have that familiar quality. Performance was generally good as well, although there is definitely some optimization work still needed. I played with both frame generation on and off and could notice the difference at points, but we're also playing a pre-release build here, so I'll be much more interested in judging final performance when the full game arrives. So after 50 hours, I think Star Wars Zero Company has all the ingredients to become one of the standout games of the year. The tactical combat is really fun, the characters and different builds give you loads of ways to approach battles, the Den ties everything together, and the level of Star Wars detail regularly impress me. Star Wars fans, I'm sure, will have different interpretations on whether they're into the story or not, but I will say underneath it all, this is simply a really fun Star Wars adventure. And like I said, customization is absolutely stellar. stellar here and could become the gold standard for squad-based tactical games. We have a lot more to come on Zero Company, so stay tuned on the channel, like, subscribe, all that stuff. You know we find all the best games here at LT Gaming. I've been Luke, and may the Force be with you.